Well, there's a couple of announcements. I know you are enjoying the delicious goodies and cookies that Julie Knorr made for us. Did you see the tools? They are delicious and look so cute. They are just outstanding. And the chocolate covered ones too are, to die for. Anyway, we're so glad that you're here. And you've noticed in our previous presentations that when somebody asks a question in the audience, we can't hear the question because we don't have a walk-around mic. So what we're going to do is we have cards for you to write down your questions, and then we'll hand them to Andrew and Wendy at the end so that we can hear your questions as well as the answers. So if anybody, I'll start here and take one. You might even want to just take one in case a question comes to your mind during their presentation, because I'm thinking it probably will. So without further ado, I'd like you to meet Andrew and Wendy Mutch, and they live in Novi, Michigan, in a kit home. And I met Andrew probably at least 10 years ago, do you think?
At least, yeah.
Yes, I was still on the board at the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society, and Andrew called and he wanted to know about kit homes in this area. And in 2005, the Sylvan Lake Home and Garden Tour featured kit homes in their tour. And that was just fascinating. In fact, at that time, we had a lady come from Chicago who drove around and picked out the houses, and those are the ones that you see on the board that were kit houses. But I think Andrew might have some surprises for you, for all of us. So, with further ado, we'll let Andrew and Wendy tell us about them.
Well, thank you, Helen Jane, and thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. Welcome to our presentation of the Kit Houses of Sylvan Lake. We're part of the Sylvan Story series of presentations, and we know that kit houses are an important part of the history of this community. And hopefully by the end of tonight's presentation, you'll learn about the importance of not only kit houses in Sylvan Lake, but their presence in communities across the United States. In fact, we are going to start this evening's presentation by asking you to join Wendy and I as we travel back in time to the 1920s in a rural farming community known as Novi Township.
What do you have there, honey?
Well, you know how we've been talking about finding a bigger place to rent?
Yes.
I was talking to Bert Monroe today. He told me about how he built his own place. You know, the big house up the road?
Yes, but surely we couldn't afford to have a new house built, could we?
That's the thing. Do you know he ordered all the materials from Sears Roebuck and put it together himself?
What? No.
Absolutely he did. I could do that too. Look at this handsome one here, the Hamilton.
Ooh, that is nice.
Look at the list of materials that it includes. It's everything necessary to build a proper house, all guaranteed by Sears Roebuck. And it says right here that we can buy it on payments, even cheaper than it would be to rent a smaller place.
Really? Then I think we should do it.
Okay, I'll fill out this form here and we'll be on our way to a brand new home.
Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I can't wait. But I do have one question.
Yes?
Will ours have a bathroom?
So imagining that young couple in their 20s carefully selecting from a catalog a home like the Sears Hamilton, and then sending off their hard-earned dollars to buy sight unseen the promise of a new home. This promise would arrive by railroad boxcar with over 10,000 pieces of lumber, parts, and paint, which would have to be unloaded and hauled by truck or wagon down dusty dirt and gravel roads to the future home site. There, the couple, with the help of family and friends and their own skills, hard work, and perseverance, and the 75-page book of instructions, would turn those boxcars full of parts into their future homes. For hundreds of thousands of families, the story of the Hamilton is their story, a story that was repeated across America, as families took this leap of faith in the pursuit of the dream of home ownership. When I purchased our home in 2003, I didn't know much about kit homes. I learned it was a Sears kit house from information that had been passed down by previous owners. I was fortunate that over the years, the previous owners had taken such good care of the house that almost all the original details of the home remain. And if I had any doubts, I only had to open the Sears Modern Homes catalog to see that even down to the smallest details, like the brick in the fireplace, it was a perfect match. But our interest in the history of the home really took hold after we had a visit a few years ago from Ron Salo. You see, Ron's parents built our house in 1926. Ron told us how his parents, Floyd and Ruth Salo, with the help of Floyd's brother Glenn, built the Sears Hamilton on Taft Road. He explained how his parents had selected a reverse floor plan so that the windows in the living and dining rooms would face south to take advantage of natural light from the sun. He shared photos of the house under construction and photos of the family and their home. Here's Ron as a young boy on the front porch of our house, and a few years later. And as exciting as that was to have that story from Ron, we were fortunate enough to have other visitors to our house. It's kind of hard to see this guy from behind. This is Kevin Tibbles. He's a correspondent with NBC News, and they asked to do a little segment on Sears houses and asked if they could come to our house. Now, if you ever want to get your house decluttered and cleaned in the fastest amount of time, agree to have a national TV news crew come and do an interview. And as part of that, by the way, a little, you'll notice Kevin's shoes there. He's dressed for the road there, little tennis shoes, little, I guess, TV correspondent trick there. We were very fortunate enough that we were able to include Ron Salo as part of the presentation. And Ron was close to, if he wasn't 90, he was close to 90 at this point. And his son said it was like his dream come true to be a national TV star. Just took him a few years to get there. And I'll tell you what's surreal is sitting in your living room and watching the TV and seeing a video of you sitting in your living room and realizing that there's like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people watching you sitting in your living room. But in any case, through Ron, we learned about the history of our home firsthand. But we realized that there are thousands of homes that share a history, and we wanted to learn more. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of kit homes and Michigan's very important role in that. And next, we'll talk about the process of buying and building your own kit house. And we'll finish with a tour of Sylvan Lake's collection of kit houses, a little photo tour as we go up and down the streets of the city, showing you examples that you may recognize or you may live in. And I will tell you, before we get started, Sylvan Lake's a pretty unique community. There's not very often that we get to present in a community where they've already done all the work. They've found most of the houses. We found a few, but the community has already done the work to document, and not only document, but to celebrate the kit houses in the community, and to have such an extensive collection of kit houses in the community, too. It's pretty unique in Southeast Michigan and across America, so we're happy to spend some time here talking about it.
Every community needs a Helen Jane.
Every community needs a Helen Jane. Yeah, absolutely, definitely. So let's start with a couple definitions. So what is a catalog? When we talk about this, what is a catalog house or what is a kit house? So catalog or mail order house is any house that was built from plans that came from provided by a catalog home company with materials that came from that company. So you need those two elements together. You need a set of plans and you need materials that they ship to you to assemble together. If you only have the plans or you only have the materials, that's not really a kit house or a catalog house. A kit house, if we get technical, is any catalog or mail order house built using pre-cut lumber. And we'll talk about the importance of pre-cut lumber in a little bit. But when we talk about kit houses, we use that kind of interchangeably, but technically it's about pre-cut lumber. And finally, Sears house, the term Sears house has really become synonymous with catalog or kit houses in general. But if there's anything that you take away from tonight's presentation, is that not every kit house came from Sears. There's a lot of different companies that were selling kit houses. Sears has just become kind of, like Kleenex or Xerox. But there are many other companies involved, and you're going to see examples of those, so that's the one definite takeaway you'll have tonight. So this is how the history of kit houses started, with a boat. These are a special kind of boat. This is what's known as a knockdown boat, and these are ads for two companies in Bay City, Michigan, that sold knockdown boats. And the idea behind a knockdown boat was that they would produce these boats in a factory, and they would essentially cut all the material necessary to build a wooden boat. They would assemble it in the factory to make sure everything fit together, and then they would knock it down into its individual parts, put all that together into a shipment, put a set of instructions, ship it off to a customer. And then the customer would take all the parts of that boat, put it back together, following the instructions, and take it out on the water. And then you would quickly learn whether you had properly followed the instructions or not. This was actually a fairly popular thing. I mean, everybody thinks DIY is like a new thing. No, people have been doing DIY forever, and do-it-yourself, build your own boat was a popular thing. And these companies in Bay City were some of the best known in the country. Well, in Bay City, there was a young man named William Sovereign, and he took an interest in the whole knockdown boat concept. But he realized that knockdown boats kind of have a limited audience. You have to live on a lake or an ocean, somewhere where you can take the boat out on the water. And if you didn't, well, then you really aren't going to be interested in knockdown boat. And he thought, well, what could you sell that kind of, people could put together, we could, turn into a money-making venture. And he got the idea for the equivalent kit house, that he could sell houses to people. And so William had this idea. Well, he's just an individual. He didn't have a company of his own. He didn't run a mill or anything. But he had this idea. So he went to his brother Otto and said, Otto, I have this great idea for kit houses. And Otto was a salesman by trade, a PR person in the newspaper industry. And he said, well, I'm not the technical guy. I mean, you're the technical wizard here. So if you can figure out how to put together this idea of a kit house, I will market it. So the two brothers formed a company called North American Construction Company in Bay City, Michigan. And they realized that's a mouthful, like nobody's going to remember North American Construction Company. So Otto came up with the idea of calling themselves Aladdin Homes, after the mythical genie who, essentially constructed a castle in a day. And so the two brothers together formed the Aladdin Homes Company in Bay City, and William doing the design and Otto doing the marketing. And they started marketing and selling kit houses to customers across the United States. Now, Otto realized the people who would be interested in doing, building their own home weren't necessarily like people in the building industry. It was going to be mechanically minded folks who were willing to kind of get their hands dirty. But, they weren't folks who were necessarily going to be reading building trades. And so he started marketing Aladdin Homes in popular magazines of the day, like the Saturday Evening Post and Collier's. And they had a little ad in there, and it said, send us a postcard, and I think it was $1, and we'll send you a catalog for our kit homes. And, they started getting people sending stuff in, and they started sending catalogs out, and they started getting orders for people who wanted to purchase one of their kit houses. And it was literally like Otto and his brother and a secretary, Otto and William and a secretary, running this business. But in very short order, this kit house idea took off, and this is in 1906. And the Aladdin Homes Company grew, and it grew, and it grew. In fact, it grew to the point that they were saying that they could sell customers a complete city of homes and all the associated buildings that went with that. So, if you get a great idea, people are going to want to copy it. And so the Aladdin brothers, they were going for a couple years working with a local mill in Bay City known as Lewis, and they ran into a little issue with the Lewis manufacturing because Lewis realized that while Aladdin Homes was great for business, that Aladdin was making all the money on that. And so they said to Aladdin, to the Sovereign brothers, they said, we really, we need to get a bigger piece of the action here. And this being Bay City, in a lumber town, there were other mills and towns, and so the Sovereign brothers said to Lewis, they said, well, we're going to take our business down the street to another mill. Nice working with you. And Lewis said, well, great. We learned all about this kit house business working with you. We're going to start selling our own homes. And so Lewis, after a couple of years, started putting out their own catalog under the name Lewis Homes. Well, fast forward a couple of years, the Sovereign brothers working with the mill down the street, International Mill and Timber, and those folks said to the Sovereign brothers, the Aladdin business is great for us, but we're going to have to expand our mill, and to do that, we're going to have to get a bigger cut of the business. Well, believe it or not, there's another mill in Bay City, and so the Sovereign brothers says, we're taking our business down the street to that third mill, or fourth mill, and so International Mill and Timber started up Sterling Homes. And so within about a 5 or 6 year period, Bay City, Michigan became the hub of kit home industry in the United States, with these three companies, Aladdin, Lewis, and Sterling, being some of the prime players in the kit house business. And so Bay City had a lot of things going for it. It was located where there's a lot of rail lines, so they could ship material in and ship material out. They had access to the Great Lakes and through Saginaw Bay. And they also had this history of expertise in the lumber industry. That's where, if you know your Michigan history, most of the state used to be covered with these massive white pines, most of which we cut down and turned into lumber, and a lot of it went through Bay City. So they had a lot of people who knew how to take raw materials and turn it into things, and so Bay City became the hub. Well, didn't take too long for other folks to want to get in on the business. In 1908, Sears Roebuck out of Chicago, which was one of the biggest mail order companies, decided they wanted to get into the kit house business. Not far behind them was their biggest competitor, Montgomery Ward, also based in Chicago. They also got into the kit house business. And in Davenport, Iowa, a big lumber mill known as Gordon Vantine, they decided that they too wanted to be in the kit house business. And so if you're getting to like 1915, 1916, and you're somebody interested in buying and building one of these houses, you had a lot of choices. There were a lot of companies competing for your business. And so when we reached the early 1920s, this is really the peak of the kit house industry. What happened is after what they called then the Great War, or World War I ended, all these soldiers and sailors came back from overseas. They wanted to start families. They wanted to build houses. All the cities of the era were just exploding at the seams. Just to give you a sense of the growth that was going on, city of Pontiac, in a 10-year period between 1920 and 1930, added 30,000 new residents. So they were adding thousands of new residents a year. Sears and Montgomery Ward provided financing, which we'll talk about. So if you didn't have money in the bank to buy a kit house, you could get a loan, a mortgage from these companies that would help you finance that. And at the peak of their business, Aladdin and Sears, who were really the two biggest players in the industry, they were selling thousands of kit homes per year. Now, we do have to put that in context. It doesn't mean that every house on the street built in the 1920s was a kit house. It actually maybe works out to be 1 or 2% of all the houses sold during this time period. But in some communities, places like Sylvan Lake, it was a significant part of the number of homes that were built during that time period. And then this happened, the stock market crash of 1929. And as you know from your American history, pretty quickly the entire country fell into a Great Depression. And with it, the whole home building business and kit house business collapsed. It's interesting to read the history of this because it didn't happen immediately. Like the stock market crashed in 1929, and you think, oh, okay, everybody's like on a breadline. That's not what happened. People thought it was gonna, okay, it's a little recession. We have these every 10 years. Things will turn around. But then things kept getting worse and worse. And finally, about 1931, things really started to go off the rails. Sears had loaned out millions of dollars in mortgages and suddenly had people who couldn't pay these mortgages back. And so, what do you do? Because you can, and they did foreclose on people, but then there's nobody able to buy the house you just foreclosed on. And if you're having like deja vu to like 2008 and 2009, well, it was kind of the same thing. In Montgomery Ward, they were just like, we're out of this. This is such a money loser. We're not going to even try to make a go of this. Sears kept going. 1934, they stopped financing houses, and they kind of closed things down, took a little breather, but then did reopen their what they called modern homes business. And again, just to kind of give you a context of what was going on, the previous 10 years, Pontiac had grown by 30,000 residents. Between 1930 and 1940, added less than 2,000 residents. And, for those familiar with the history of Pontiac, what was driving the growth of Pontiac those years was the auto industry. And in fact, really was just this engine of success and financial wealth for so many people. And then, as the economy collapsed, that went with it. And so you saw the growth just really come to a halt in so many ways. Sears offered their final modern homes catalog in 1940. But actually, Sears kept them, they stopped selling, they stopped sending out the catalogs, but they had really shifted their operations to stores, storefront operations. So, for instance, in Pontiac, there was a Sears store downtown. If you're familiar with the Lafayette Market, that's where... Yeah, Lafayette Market is in the old Sears store building. And so the catalogs were less important. But what happened that really kind of closed things down on the kit house business again was when World War II kicked in after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the government put out restrictions on everything. You couldn't get any of the materials you needed to build a house because it was needed for the war effort. And so Sears closed things down. Once the war ended, we had another big suburban residential boom here in the United States. But all those soldiers and sailors coming back from Europe and from the Pacific, starting new families, moving out to the suburbs, they weren't interested in building kit houses. They were moving into places like this. Levittown, Pennsylvania. And what happened is the suburban developers had kind of mastered the art of mass production of homes. They took assembly line concepts that you used to build cars or used to build bombers during the war and said, hey, we can do the same thing with a house, and literally churned out hundreds and thousands of houses across the United States in this kind of development. That being said, the three companies here in Michigan, in Bay City, Aladdin, Lewis, and Sterling, during the wartime, they had been building or selling and constructing barracks and things for the military. They went back to building residential homes, and styles changed. People weren't interested in, they didn't want a little cute arts and crafts bungalow. They wanted something like this, that. Your traditional or classic American suburban home with the perfect green grass. You're out there watering. This is what folks were interested in. So this is what the kit house companies transitioned to and they sold. But they never sold in the numbers that they sold during the 20s. And so they would sell maybe a couple hundred homes a year. And over the years, things just kind of, it got more and more challenging. And what really took them out was the OPEC embargo in the early 1970s, for those who remember that. And inflation, good old inflation, knocked them all out. Aladdin was the last of the companies to close up shop in 1982. They were a family-owned company the entire way, and so that was probably one of the things that allowed them to hang on long enough. The longest, but as I know, they were the last man standing when they closed. And that was really the end of the traditional kit house industry. There's still places where you can get kit houses. I always hear from folks, Lowe's and Home Depot sell these little kits or even some house-sized things. And there are companies that sell more pre-manufactured today than it was back in those days. But that traditional kit house industry kind of ended when Aladdin went away in 1982. So now with a little history behind us, I'm going to hand it over to Wendy and have her talk a little bit about the process of buying and building your kit house.
So who would choose to buy a house from a catalog, you ask? Well, some of us remember the Sears catalog, and if you lived in a rural area, that was your avenue to get things you couldn't get locally. So it was not a foreign concept to many of the people of that time that you would order something from the catalog that could be that expensive. And there were advantages to buying from a catalog. You save on the material. Instead of going to the lumber yard and buying more than you need, they give you exactly what you need, and they had machines to cut exactly, so you didn't need any of those tools, cookie or reel otherwise, to cut, measure twice, cut once. They would reduce the waste down to 2%. So Aladdin says, we save all the costs, which adds no value, by selling direct from the forest to the home. So you didn't have to pay a cut to the local lumber yard. You went directly to them. And here they have this illustration where they were able to get 20 feet of lumber from a 16-foot board. That's math, it's not magic, and there you go. So they were very wise in how they did that. And Sears did this, an example of how you saved on the labor, the hours you put into building your home. They did a real-world experiment where they built a house the traditional way with carpenter labor or the pre-cut way, and you see 352 hours versus 583 and a half. And you see that the work site on the right is sort of messy and there are piles of lumber. The one on the left is very tidy and efficient. They also offered finance, as Andrew said. You could get a mortgage from them. Liberal and easy payment. Aladdin would not finance your home. You had to pay a cash deposit and give the balance on delivery. And you'll see the illustration from Sears. That silly man is renting his home and throwing his rent into the garbage instead of owning his own home. So they did have a lot of competition for your dollar because there were all of these companies. Sears and Montgomery Ward had a built customer base. Aladdin did not. They had no catalog experience. But I have an Aladdin catalog here. And it's lovely. It's a leatherette binding, so it's very fancy. And they would handwrite in gold the name of the prospector buyer. And it has color illustrations. It's very lovely. Pullouts. And I like to think that they made it smaller so that if you had a pile of catalogs, theirs would be on top. Always thinking that marketing guy. And Aladdin also, I'm going to pass this around. This is a doorknob. They would pay $1 for every prospective buyer you let tour your house. So there's a doorknob that has their little logo on it. And here is a knocker. So if you lift up that little Aladdin's hands, you'll see it says Aladdin on his stomach. And they also were so proud of the quality of their lumber, they would pay you $1 for every knot in the wood that you found. So that's high quality, yeah. I don't think there's a lumber yard in today's world that will do that for you.
So the next step in the process is, if you've decided you're interested in buying yourself a kit house, is you order one. So it would start with the catalog. Here's a cover of, I think this is like 1929, 1930s Sears Modern Home Catalog. Another option from the 1920s onward was you might visit your local Sears Modern Homes salesperson. There were, we'll show some examples of this. There was one located in Pontiac. There was, depending on the years, there's 1 or 2 or 3 locations in Detroit, often associated with a Sears store where you could go in, see examples of the material. Sometimes they even had mock-ups of rooms and houses that you could go inside and tour. So it was a real full court press there with the process. And then once you had your catalog, you would review the different models and prices associated with that. And obviously, everybody had their own price point that they could work with. What's interesting is Wendy and I have gone on eBay and ordered and purchased original Sears Modern Homes catalog. And almost every one that we've gotten, as we're flipping through the pages of that, you'll find pages where somebody circled a model or done a little math where they're trying to tally up, okay, is this the one that I can afford? And I always wonder, is that the one that they got? Did they actually go through with it? And then once you decided that, kind of did the math, noodled it out, and decided on the model that you were interested in, you would send a request or a request for a quote from Sears or Aladdin or whoever you're ordering from, including any changes or upgrades that you wanted. It's kind of like going to the car lot. You get your eye on a particular model and the salesman says, oh, well, we have the premium version of this that's got the, sunroof and the, heated seats. Don't you really want to go for that one? Well, they were happy to encourage folks to upgrade their houses, and any changes they would work with you to incorporate those for, of course, an additional fee. So here's an example of a house in the Sears Modern Homes catalog. This is the Rembrandt. Excuse me. This is one of their larger Dutch colonial style houses. And this was typical of what you would see in the catalog. You get a drawing showing you the exterior of the house, of kind of a floor plan showing you the layout of the interior of the house, and then all the details that were associated with the house. So essentially, it was a breakdown of all the things that were going to be included with your order. We'll talk a little bit more about price. That was, there's more. There's more. And then some models included these interior drawings. So this is for the Rembrandt, kind of showing you how the different rooms are laid out and how they would look. Now, our house, the Hamilton, was featured in the Modern Homes catalog. It had the same kind of two-page spread where we had images of the interior of the house. I showed you the fireplace. Let me just say, the rooms appear larger in the pictures than they do in real life. Yeah, they're not as big as they look, but... And of course, an important thing to point out here, of course, these are fully furnished from furniture and rugs and lamps and everything. Of course, where would you get all that stuff? Mm-hmm. Some people said that the whole purpose of modern homes was to get people to buy stuff to fill their homes. Because people back then were just the same as we are today. We get a new house and we want to put a bunch of new stuff in it. So... this is the stuff that always fascinates people because they open up these catalogs and they see, wow, a house for like $900. That's crazy. Here's an example of the Ferry. So this was kind of a lower end, smaller lower cost house that Sears sold. It's really like 4 rooms, but it does have a bathroom. This one was about $945. This is like, again, mid-1920s. At the other end of the spectrum was the Lexington. This is one of their largest, most expensive houses, the colonial-style house. 2 stories. You see you have like wings on each side of the house. That was listed for about $4,200. But the real story is that the list price is not the off the lot, drive off the lot price. It's a little bit more than that. So based on the research that we've done and from actual documentation we've seen, the total cost of a house would typically be about 2 to 3 times what you would see in the catalog when you were all, done with the whole process. Things that were not reflected in that, you had to have a piece of property to build on. So if you didn't have that, you had to buy it. You were responsible for the basement and the foundation of the house. Wendy's going to talk about that. That was an additional cost. If you were not such a handy DIY kind of person and you had to hire people to put it together for you, that was an additional cost. So when you see, a $4,000 house, in actuality, the real bottom line price of that might have been $8,000 to $12,000. A $900 house would work out to be like $1,800 to $2,700. Now, the interesting thing is that, and I see people do this all the time, they go online, like the inflation calculator, like, what's that house cost today? And they're like, what? That Lexington's $50,000? Well, housing prices, everything else, for the most part, kind of went like this. Housing prices in America have gone like that. And so, no, you cannot build the Lexington for $50,000. You couldn't build it for $500,000 today. Not with the quality of materials and the labor and everything that was required to put that together. But, back then, it was a fairly affordable option for many people, and some people took advantage of that. There were also some other things that weren't included in the list price. These are extras that you had to pay extra to kind of complete your house. Things like the heating system. Now, we didn't have HVAC systems. This is just strictly heating, no air conditioning. And Sears offered a number of different options. Top of the line was steam heat. So, you ever seen those old radiators hissing and steam water heat? That was considered the best kind of heat you could have in your house. And people who have those systems often rave about way better than that forced air stuff. At the bottom end, if you really were kind of, kind of tight-fisted about things, we have at the top there, what they affectionately called the octopus. The octopus was actually a step above that. The very bottom was this one at the bottom. This is the Hercules furnace. Essentially, it was kind of centrally located in the house, and there was a big grate above the furnace. And it was a coal-fired furnace, and it just pumped heat out. And the idea was if you pumped enough heat out through the grate, eventually it would all trickle to the various corners of the house. In reality, the house was either really too hot or too cold in every possible location, except maybe one little sweet spot. So they developed what we call the octopus, which is another coal-fired furnace design, but had these arms that extended to all the various rooms, kind of more evenly distributed the heat. You could have whatever you wanted as long as you're willing to pay. Sears also sold lighting of various designs. They had a lot of different designs, actually, so whatever style suited your taste, you could pay extra. And then indoor plumbing, which for some folks was a new thing. They had never had indoor plumbing. Toilets, sinks, bathtubs, shower heads, the whole, even hot water, the whole thing. But again, this was extra that you had to pay. It wasn't included in the list price. So again, when you see that little $900 house, as you add the heating system and the plumbing and the extra things that really you need, the price goes up. So when you're ready to commit, you fill out this information blank. It has important information like, do you own the property you want to build on? Very important. What's the closest railroad depot? Because that was how they were going to ship the materials to you. Were you employed? Kind of things like that. If you wanted to do financing, this is your mortgage application for Sears. Actually, it's only that bottom part. This is your application. This is where they wanted to know things like, do you have a job? How much does your job pay a week? They were very liberal with their financing, which eventually did catch up with them. But they were also very important for back then was Sears in particular was interested in working with anybody. So they would finance people who couldn't get financing from a local bank. If you're a woman, or you're a minority like African American, or you're a recent immigrant, you were not going to get financed by the local bank. They just did not finance folks like that. And Sears did. They were like, hey, you got a job or a steady source of income, works for us, we'll finance you. And so Sears in particular made possible the dream of home ownership for a lot of folks who it just otherwise wouldn't have happened for. When we talk about building the house and what's included, I'm going to do a quick run through of that. So the things that your order would include was the framing, lumber, and siding for the house, the exterior of the house, all the roofing material, shingles and gutters, all the flooring through the house, and you decided what grade flooring you wanted. Kind of basic was pine. Most people were encouraged to upgrade to oak. You typically have oak in kind of the public rooms of the house, so the living room and dining room, and then transition to maple in the kitchen and bathroom, and then maybe have pine upstairs or in a back bedroom. But you chose. You just had to pay more if you wanted the higher grade stuff. All the millwork in the house, so those big baseboards, picture rail, doors and windows, including all the hardware that went with it. Those were all included in your order. You either could do plaster walls, or Sears fairly early on sold what was a plasterboard product that looks a lot like drywall. It's not the same as drywall, but it essentially was a sheet base of sheets of plaster that you would put up, very similar to drywall. Nails, and they shipped them by the keg because you were doing a lot of nailing, putting that house together. And then you got to choose all the interior and exterior paints and finishes, and they would recommend, like, this particular house looks most attractive in a creamy white with brown trim. But you could see they had all these color choices, and Sears had their own line of paint. It was called Sirocco paint, so Sirocco standing for Sears Roebuck Company, Sirocco paint. So they had you covered from start to finish. And then some of the houses included some of these extras that you see here, built-ins and cabinetry and other things, or you could order those in addition. The things that were not included, plaster, so you could get the lath, the little wood strips to go behind the plaster, but you had to supply the plaster yourself, bricks, and foundation blocks. And the reason they didn't supply those, it was too expensive to ship that stuff. So they would have you coordinate with a local supply yard to order those.
So while you're waiting for your materials to arrive, you have homework. You're going to dig your basement and construct your foundation. And Sears can also help you with that because they've got this wonderful Wizard concrete block maker. And you can see here this lovely gentleman is demonstrating how it works. You can see he's getting tireder and tireder the further he goes along. It would be hard work. You could add in the 1-minute concrete batch mixer and really crank them out. And I hope you have friends to help you because your materials are going to arrive by railroad, and you have 48 hours to unload your boxcar because then the railroad wants that car and they're going to start charging you a fine. So, and I hope you live close to the railroad because it's going to take lots of trips with you and your little horse and cart. But they were very systematic in how they loaded the boxcar. They put the things that you're going to need first in first so that as you unload it, it ends up on the top of the pile. And Andrew talked about the pre-cut lumber. At first, they didn't mark those things. I suspect they heard from customers that it would really help us out if you stamped the lumber. And so I have a little example of stamped lumber from a Sears house. It's an actual 2x4, because it's that old. And you can see that the stamp is on the back of it. And that would help. And there is a little funny video on YouTube. It's a short, and it's Buster Keaton. It's called 1 Week. And this lovely newlywed couple gets a gift of a kit house, and a ne'er-do-well person changes the instructions on them, and the outcome of what they get after they build it is very different from what the catalog showed. So it's very funny. I recommend it. It's a good little short. You built it yourself by the book, 75-page manual. Yes, 75 pages, that's it. I have a copy here. They have very similar introductions. This is a foreword. You're entering into a pleasant enterprise, the erection of a Wardway ready-cut home. No matter how many buildings you may have built, it is absolutely necessary that you read these instructions before any of the work is started. We don't change much, right? We don't want to read the directions. And of course, Sears says, do not take anyone's advice as to how this building should be assembled. Yeah, the neighbors would say, oh, that's not important. Follow the directions. It's important. So it could take 3 to 6 months to build if an owner did it himself.
Yeah, so that's an example of a Sears house in Ann Arbor that was built by a college professor and his family. I think it took him about 3 to 6 months to finish that. And it was kind of like taught classes during the day, went home and built your house at night. And must have done an okay job because it's still standing 100 years later. And one thing to talk about, just, Sylvan Lake, because of its location and because of the people who were buying and building the houses here, I don't know that there was as much DIY going on here. You were very close to Pontiac. You had pretty much access to every possible trade who could help you. Sears actually did allow you to finance the labor as part of your home loan, so folks who financed through Sears could pay to have people help them. So I think a lot of the houses here locally were probably built with help. But I also think there's probably houses here that somebody did that. They worked on an assembly line in Pontiac during the day and came out to Sylvan Lake and put together their future home in their free time. So before we do the home tour, just want to talk a little bit about our research. And we touched on this a little bit earlier. So Rebecca Hunter, who's a very well-known kit house researcher out of the Chicago area. She lives in Elgin, Illinois, where they have somewhere around 200 Sears houses that she helped identify most of those. She came out here in 2005 and did a survey, and she knows not only Sears, she knows pretty much all the companies and their houses. And from that list and that board back there, there's around 32 houses she identified. She wasn't sure about all of them, and so we didn't include all those in the presentation, but that was kind of our starting point. Then as we did research, we found 6 more houses that Rebecca didn't have on her list. 2 of those from Sears Roebuck, 2 of them from Montgomery Ward. They sold under the brand name Wardway. And then there's 2 more possible Wardway houses. I didn't include them in tonight's presentation just because it was going to run a little bit long with those. But these are houses that we found in other communities where Montgomery Ward houses were built in close proximity to them, the same exact model. So we're pretty sure they're from Montgomery Ward. We just haven't made that definite connection because they don't appear in the catalog. Otherwise, I would know for sure. So, and then I also did mortgage research at Oakland County and found mortgages for 9 of the houses in Sylvan Lake because everybody here had done such a great job and Rebecca had done such a great identifying them. 8 of those 9 were already on the list. I added 1 more through mortgage research. And then I will just touch on that quickly. So we talked about financing. Sears threw out all their sales records. There's no record of houses sold by Sears that in the Sears archives. The Aladdin sales records were saved, fortunately, for the most part, and those are up at the Clark Historical Library at Central Michigan University. So anybody who owns an Aladdin house can do some research and get the copy of the exact original sales record. And those are really fascinating. I don't want to go into those again, but it's really cool history of the house. Tells you how much it cost, even things like what color paint you ordered for your house if you want to take it back to the original. And this is just some of the names of the folks you'll find on the paperwork if you go to the Register of Deeds and do research in the mortgages. In Oakland County, there's around a little over 300 Sears houses, and like 90% of those Sears houses had a mortgage associated with them. So it was a big part of the business. This was the mortgage for our house. Our house was financed through Sears. Floyd Salo actually took out this mortgage as a single man, and then within like a month got married. So we suspect it was kind of the house that they chose to build as a couple. That's the history. Ron wasn't able to confirm or deny that, but that kind of makes sense. He followed shortly thereafter, so that all sequence makes sense. Interesting thing about this mortgage, the monthly payment for it was $15 a month. Don't you love that? So I've seen kind of a similar map shown in some of the earlier Sylvan stories. Hopefully those of you who live here know Sylvan's location on the interurban line. This is just showing some of the interurban lines and how you really were centrally located. You could get to Detroit, you could get to Pontiac, even out as far as our part of the world, Northville and Novi, riding the interurban. And so that was an important reason why people were moving here and kit houses were built here. In fact, really, I'll show you this next slide. This is just showing the Waldron Hotel in Pontiac. For those who know that history, that was one of the locations for Sears Modern Homes. This is a map showing just Sears houses in kind of this part of Oakland County. Pontiac in the middle, moving over to Rochester Hills, Auburn Hills, and then Sylvan Lake and Kego Harbor, and then Waterford to the west. Pretty much where the interurban and railroad lines ran, you're going to find kit houses. And And what's interesting in Oakland County, so of course when I talk about Oakland County and where Sears houses were built, people always say, oh, it's Royal Oak, right? Royal Oak and Ferndale, that's where all the Sears houses were built. And there are some there. I'm not going to deny that. But Pontiac, number 1. Waterford, number 2 for Sears houses in Oakland County. Because Pontiac was exploding, and just like people were moving to Sylvan Lake and to Kego Harbor, even out into West Bloomfield, they were moving out into Waterford. The rail line ran through Waterford, still runs through Waterford. So Waterford's number 2 in Oakland County for Sears houses. Interesting little fact there. So broke up the city into 2 sections. East side, we're right up there. And this is from 1936. And you can kind of see quite a few homes already built in this part of Sylvan Lake. And among those homes were a number of kit houses. This map shows some of them, just the ones that are in tonight's presentation. There's more. If you don't see it in tonight's presentation, we'll show you can go back there and look on the board. There's more. The first example I'm going to show you is on Garland for the Sears Crescent. This was a very popular model Sears sold. It came in 2 floor plans. The smaller floor plan had 2 columns on each side of the front porch. The larger house has 3 columns on each side of the front porch. So if I drive up, I don't even have to see the back of the house. I just see the number of columns on the porch, and I know which floor plan they have. And here's the house on Garland. You can see it's been expanded a little bit, but you can still see those original porch columns. The arrangement of the windows matches up really nicely. And here's a view from the front. And this is the one, besides our house, one house not from Sylvan Lake in this presentation, but it's literally like across your border. And it's the prettiest little Sears Crescent you'll ever see on Maddie Lane. So if you go down Maddie Lane, go up Maddie Lane, I should say, on your right is the Sears Crescent. On your left is actually another Sears house called the Conway. So there's 2 Sears houses across the street from each other. Here's a cute little bungalow-style house that Sears sold called the Solace. Sold for a number of years. It was pretty popular. Here's the house on Glenwood. And actually, we had a hard time identifying this. Rebecca had a hard time identifying it, too, because typically you see it looks like this. And this house is actually turned on the lot. And that little dormer that's usually on the back of the house is now on the side of the house. So that's the Sears Solace. Over on Glenwood is a house from Sterling. So Sterling, remember, from Bay City. This is the Miracle. And this Miracle over on Rosedale is pretty original. And then we'll do one more view here on the side. Next example, so this was a house that Sears only sold for a few years called the Melrose. It's kind of strange. I shouldn't say it's strange. It has an unusual design because it has this front door, and it also has like a little side door that you can't even see. It's hidden behind the bush, but there's actually like 2 doors on the front corner of the house. Sears also sold a model called the Bellwood that has this kind of really distinct curved roof, different house. This house on Rosedale has a mortgage from Sears. Kind of hard to see in this photo. I just couldn't get a great shot of it. It has a curved roof like the Bellwood, but the side of the house is like the Melrose. So maybe somebody said to Sears, hey, I really like the front entrance of this one house, but I like the floor plan of this house. Can you put them together? Yeah, sure. A couple extra bucks will make it happen. But we think this is a Melrose. It has a mortgage from Sears, so we know it's from Sears. It's just a kind of a distinct design, unusual design. The most popular Sears house in the city is the Dover. There's a number of examples of the Dover. This is a really popular design. Sears sold this from about 1928 into the early 1940s when they stopped selling houses. And you can see this design. So the architectural folks will call this English cottage design. I always like to refer to it as a cat slide roof design. So this little swooping thing, this is where the cat slides down the roof. And Sears sold a number of these different cat slide roof designs, and there's a lot of other companies that sold houses that look like these, so sometimes it's a challenge to know one from the other. Sylvan has a number of examples of this. This was, as they got on in the program, this is closer to the 40s, they made that slope even faster, apparently, so the cats could go, I don't know, faster down the slide, I don't know, okay. And this is just the layout showing you the floor plan of the house. So you have living room, dining room, a first floor bedroom, and a small bathroom. And then this was kind of unusual. It wasn't until like the later years of the program that they figured out like having like more than one bathroom in a house might be a good thing, especially on a 2-story house. But the Dover did have an upstairs bathroom as well as 2 bedrooms upstairs. So that's kind of the general layout of the house. And here's an example on Oakwood. This little dormer may be original. There's another house, Dover in Waterford, that has that exact same dormer design, so that may be original to the house. And you'll notice this particular house, the ends, so we talk about the gables being clipped, kind of that angled design on the Dover. This house doesn't have that, it just has the straight design. That would have just been the homeowner saying, hey, I just want that kind of basic, more squared off look there. And so, but that does have a mortgage associated with it. And mortgages for the Dovers were around $5,000 to $6,000. So, it wasn't a cheap house at all. This was this was kind of their mid-level house. Not like a Lexington kind of thing, but definitely not like a Ferry. This was a more expensive house. Here's another example on Benvenue. And again, now these dormers may be original, may be added. Somebody who knows the history of that may be able to tell me. We've seen them with both. We see them with and without, so it's sometimes hard to know. And obviously it's been added onto, but you can still see the general lines of the Dover. And this is over on Avondale, another Dover. Now, we also have some examples from Montgomery Ward, their Wardway line. This is the Maywood. This was a popular model for them. We've got this one on Pontiac Drive. It's got that little cap dormer. Sears sold a model called the Barrington that looks almost exactly like this. So sometimes differentiating the two is difficult, but we do think this is a Maywood. And a little bit bigger view of. Here's another cat slide roof, but this is a little bit more modest in size. This is the Claremont, a very popular model with Sears. A little bit smaller than the Dover. You can see it's not that 2 or story and a half design. It's really a single story house. Here's an example on Maplewood. And what I like about this house on Maplewood, it's kind of hard to see here in this photo, but this house has its original door. And if you go to the catalog, you can actually see the design of these doors. And Sears had a very particular, these iron straps on the door, a very particular design that if we see a house with that design, we know it's, at least that front door is, and probably the entire house is from Sears. We can identify a house just from the front door. Now, Gordon Vantine, talked about them. This is the Chatham. Looks kind of like the Crescent. Remember the Crescent at the beginning? Very similar style, but it has some elements that you can see how well that matches up. Look at those front windows and those side lights and that porch design. That is a perfect match. And that's over on Maplewood. And now this is a little bit challenging. So this is the Wardway Newport. Sears sold a model almost identical to this called the Mitchell. This house is on Glenwood. And this was sometimes happens when I go out like trying to take photos of houses. Ooh. I'll come back in December and I can actually see it, but I'm not going to get a picture of that house right now. So take my word for it. Behind all these bushes, we believe is a Wardway Newport. Another Wardway house is the Winstead. You can see that's kind of an interesting design with the little dormer off to the left. And here is that same house on Avondale. You can see how well that matches up. This was also financed through Montgomery Ward, so that's how we know it's a Montgomery Ward house. And one more view of that one. And across the street is this house. This is the Sears Randolph. Now, Sears sold a model that's essentially the exact same design, but different finishes. So this one's finished with brick and stucco, and they call it the Randolph. They also have another model that you're going to actually see later called the Willard. Only difference between the two is the exterior finish. The Willard has wood siding finish. So this is the Randolph on Avondale. So that Winstead we just showed you, this is right across the street from that. And actually next door to the Winstead is a Dover. So you can kind of don't stand in the middle of the street. Maybe you can in Sylvan Lake. Stand in the street and you're like literally surrounded by kit houses. Then we'll move over to the west side of town. So this is really interesting to me when I was kind of doing a little bit of research. Look how much vacant land there was in this part of Sylvan Lake in the 1930s. Like, you go there now, all this is built out. There isn't like a lot of open space here. But you can see the two streets there that we're going to talk about, Lakeland and Woodland, just a handful of houses on there. And so quite a few of those were kit houses. So here's the map showing that. And also, I'm going to start with a couple finds that we found that got missed in the 2005 survey. So Greer Boulevard, I call that the panhandle of Sylvan Lake. I don't know what you all call it locally. It's that little strip of Sylvan Lake. It's like, what's that doing there? That goes south of Orchard Lake Road. Well, the cool thing is, when we went over there, because of course I'm curious, like what's on the street, I found an example of this Montgomery Ward house, the Kelton. And there it is. You can see how it matches up. Now this is reversed, so you see how they reversed the floor plan? Like we talked about, maybe sometimes you want, your bedrooms on the north side or the south side or whichever side you want, whatever best fits the lot, they would do that. Typically no charge. That was one thing they didn't charge you extra for, was to reverse the floor plan. So this is the Kelton. These are, and if you go and visit these in person, just drive down the street, these are modest houses. Like you think, oh, okay, that looks a decent sized house. These are not like huge houses. Right next door to the Kelton is the Sears Claremont. Now, Sears Claremont, I showed you an example of that earlier. It's actually a little deceptive. It looks like a smaller house, but it goes way back. It actually is it's got, normally has 3 bedrooms in it. Because it keeps going and going and going. But from the front, it looks like a more modest house. But these are right next to each other on Greer. Talked about the Willard a few minutes ago. So here is what the Willard looked like in the catalog. And then we have one on Lakeland that's a really nice example. Let's get a bigger view of that here. And then what I liked about this house is, sometimes you'll see houses and they've like been expanded and it's just like it ruins the whole look of that. But you can see from this side, you wouldn't know that they had expanded that house and added on to the back and what have you. So they did a nice job of doing something that retained the original lines of the house and yet made it more functional for them. Also on Lakeland is this kind of interesting design from Wardway called the Gerard. And it's pretty distinctive design, so this one was pretty easy to spot. You can see, that matches up very well. The end windows, you'll see they're a little bit different from the catalog, but we see this quite a bit with this particular model. The folks wanted those windows a little bit wider apart, more centered on the rooms that are up there. And here we go. Right across the street from that Wardway house is another Wardway house called the Huron on Lakeland. Now you'll notice immediately like, hey, what happened to the dormer? I don't know. It may have been there originally, it may not have. Sometimes people didn't need that dormer or didn't want it. They didn't want to pay for it, the little extra. They said, hey, can you save $25 on this house? Well, take the dormer off. But the windows on this house match up perfectly. Like everything else on this house is like a perfect match for the Huron. And what's interesting too is, so I think you've seen enough examples now. A lot of the houses here in Sylvan that were built during that time period were not like these 2-story houses. They were either like a single story or what we call story and a half house. Didn't see very much of this, and this is also kind of like a farmhouse style. Didn't see very much of that. And it was just the nature of the community. It was like more of a resort community, as you know, and a lot of people moving out, have a little bit more of suburban style lifestyle. This was like more of either a farmhouse or a city house. And folks were more interested in those cottagey looking houses. And you see that reflected in the models that people bought. Here's another side of that. One thing I didn't touch on at the beginning, but I'll mention now is, Montgomery Ward and Gordon Vantine had an interesting relationship. Gordon Vantine supplied all the materials and most of the plans for Montgomery Ward houses. So it oftentimes can be very difficult to identify, okay, is this a Montgomery Ward house or is it Gordon Vantine house? All the material came from Davenport, Iowa. Sometimes you get lucky. This is not a Sylvan Lake example. This is from somebody in Royal Oak, but they found stamped lumber in their house. And it says, from Montgomery Ward, from Davenport, Iowa, which actually it was Gordon Vantine. They just subcontracted that out. Or with the mortgages, were able to identify they had financed through Montgomery Ward. But you'll notice that in Rebecca's list, a lot of times she'll mention Gordon Vantine or Montgomery Ward because we just don't know for sure. When we know for sure, we'll mention it. If we don't know for sure, we'll just say that we don't know. Another thing that happened in the Sears, over the years, the Sears program, is in the late 1920s, they got into custom home design in a big way. And so they encouraged folks to look beyond the catalog. They would still do the plans and provide the materials. And so we would get house designs that don't match anything in the catalog, but have mortgages associated with them. So this house is, I believe this is Lakeland? Woodland, okay. Yeah.
Which is I was going to talk to you about my house.
Yeah. So this is a Sears house, Sears materials, Sears financing, but you won't find this design in the catalog. Somebody custom designed this. There may have been additions or changes over the years too. I'm still trying to figure out what's original and what's not.
I can tell you a little bit about that house. It's in the brother and stuff later.
Okay. Okay, we'll talk about that. I want to learn more about that. But so that's a custom design house. Another example on Woodland of this is a Gordon Vantine house, and the folks who live in this house are here tonight. They just learned that they lived in a kit house, and they're like, what? What's this kit house stuff? So this is, as Gordon Vantine, a especially pleasing 5-room bungalow house, popular model for them, I believe. And you can see how well the house there matches up. So it still has that porch design, the window arrangements, everything. And then I always love reading the catalogs is a hoot because the stuff that they write. So it says, the more you study this 5-room house, the more you will be impressed with its attractive exterior, its happy arrangement of rooms, and its genuine economy. The roof lines are excellent. Their broad sweep is emphasized by wide closed cornices. The porch has been carefully designed. Here the main roof has been extended to cover it, while the square columns resting on concrete piers give it an appearance of solidity and hospitality. I mean, yeah, true, but I mean, it's kind of like, wow. The marketing folks, you thought Otto was crazy with the marketing, and Sears people there, and the Gordon Vantine, they just, some stuff. So this is house, again, I'd have to look up the build date. I'm thinking it's like 20s. So again, this is house that's like over 100 years old at this point, or close to it. Gordon Vantine. That is on Woodland. All right, thank you. I had the address earlier. Okay, and last but not least is one more Sears Dover. This is over on Woodland. And I wanted to feature this one at the end because the owner touched base with me a number of years ago and graciously supplied me with photos, not only of the outside of the house, which I'm going to show you here. And you might have noticed with the other Dovers, they have like 3 windows on this left side. A lot of them got customized, only have 2. That's very typical. Doesn't detract the fact that it's a Dover, it has a mortgage associated. But what I love is the interior photos that she shared with me, that she allowed me to share with you tonight. So we're going to go inside the Dover and come in through that circle top front door. Try like paying for one of those today. That'll cost you. And then there's that Sears design. There is that very distinctive iron strapping that I talked about. And then here's some more details. So these are little things that I look for when I'm trying to figure out if a house is from a certain kit house company. So this is the doorknobs. And in the Sears world, this is called Narcissus. You can see how that matches up with the different designs that they sold. So that's a Sears design, if we had any questions. This is a cool little feature in the house, built-ins, cabinetry, storage, really. I don't have a picture of the design, but this is a standard Sears Fireplace design. So if you look in the catalog, building materials catalog, you'll see this particular, you could buy this fireplace, the woodwork and all that associated with it. And then look at this cool little, you know. And one more. And thank you very much for sharing those. Those are they're really cool to share. We don't always get to see inside the houses, so getting to see all that detail is really awesome. And with that, we are done with our tour of Sylvan Lake Kit Houses. There are more back there to see if you haven't had a chance to see those. And we are done with our presentation, so thank you.